Hello everyone and welcome back to part 12 of Brutal-Fairytales Stray Dogs Redemption. We do want to take this time to apologize. Had melted down his laptop producing episodes for his channel. We do hope you'll remember that we are doing all this with less than a shoestring budget. Please remember to like, share, comment and subscribe, as it will encourage us to release future episodes of the series. And without further ado, let us begin Brutal-Fairytales Stray Dogs Redemption Part 12. Outside, Astaroth carried everything to the park. He headed towards his secret place where his dogs were waiting for him. He had a long day and was ready to be done with it. He dropped the dog food bag onto the ground and using his Bowie knife cut the bags open. He let out a loud whistle calling his dogs. He was happy to see them all running towards him. At least he knew they were still safe and alive. At least they did not need him to stay alive, unlike Alastair. However, he knew it was only natural that Alastair acted the way he did when he saw the Hobgrim. It was not exactly like he was used to getting shot at. Nor was he used to having to fight for his life at a moment's notice. These things are all too common to Astaroth. Sadly, he was all too used to fighting like that. He rested his rifle and shotgun against the tree before he put his back on the tree. He slowly slid down until he was sitting on the ground. He stretched out his left leg as he sat in the shade under the tree. His wounds from earlier started stinging, making him remember his wound. He checked to see if the staples had torn loose. He was grateful to see them still intact. He let out a sigh of relief as he fanned his face with his hat. He gave Rook his ground beef before he ate his sandwich. Rook growled and snapped at some of the other dogs as they tried to get close to his ground beef. Astaroth could only let out a half-hearted chuckle before he patted his brother's side. He patted the dogs and then sent them on their merry way. He carefully slid his jacket off and set it to the side. He drank some of the water before he cut the top of the jug off for Rook to drink the rest. He opened his soda and started to drink it as he ate his sandwich. The hot air rushed over them, beating against them and dancing through the trees, making them sway in the breeze. Yet no matter how hot it was, all Astaroth could feel was cold. He knew that he should be hot. He could clearly see the sweat running down him. Nevertheless, all he could feel was cold. He may as well been sitting out in a snowy field instead of the city park. Once Astaroth was done with his sandwich, he gave the rest to Rook. They sat there in the shade of the tree and watched as the wild dogs ate out of the bag of food for them. This is a peaceful moment for them. The fight was long since over and everything finally hit them all at once. Rook walked over and laid his head on Astaroth's lap. Astaroth petted his brother's side before rubbing his head for him. Astaroth's eyes started to get heavier and heavier, to the point where he could barely keep them open. All the adrenaline that was pumping through their veins had burned out of them. As Astaroth slowly drifted off to sleep, he tried to stay awake but could not. As before, he found himself back on an ancient battlefield, but this time the body was heading towards an ancient city. As he carved his way to the gate, he put his free hand on the thick wooden gate with heavy metal bars. Not even the best battering ram could break through this gate. The body dug its fingers into the wood like it was paper to him, then walked back effortlessly, bending the metal bars. With no trouble at all, he tore the gate out from the massive stone blocks. As he looked at the twisted, mangled mass that used to be the gate, with a bored sigh, the body flicked it to the side, sending it flying off into the horizon. As he walked into the city, he rolled his head around, popping his neck. He was bored, looking for something exciting. As the soldiers saw him coming towards them, they quickly opened fire on him with their early flintlock rifles. However, even that was not enough. The muskets got close to the body in an instant. Astaroth could feel the body's free hand move and catch all the muskets close to it. As the missed shots flew past him, the body dropped his hand down to his side and rolled the muskets around in his palm. He rolled one in between his index finger and thumb. He flicked the musket like he was a child playing marbles. The musket rocketed from his fingers and straight through a soldier's head. The other soldiers around him didn't even notice, not until the soldier's head popped like a balloon, leaving only his lower jaw and tongue behind. The musket flew through a stone wall behind the soldier and kept going into the distance until eventually disappearing into the horizon. As the other soldiers saw their brother at arm's head explode, they quickly panicked. They turned around and started to run as fast as they could for their very lives. However, the body was just bored and looking for something to entertain him. He fired off the rest of the muskets at them without ever moving from his position. Once he was out of munitions, he simply continued on his way. Astaroth could tell that the body was just plain bored. There was no excitement to him, no energy to any of his actions. He was just outright bored of everything around him. He needed to find something to do, anything to relieve his boredom. Or else he feared he might die of boredom. In an instant there was a blinding flash of light and heat that engulfed him. He soon found himself standing within a sea of fire and molten rock. The body looked around confused as if he did not know what happened. Astaroth was wondering if the body was wondering, was that something he did by sheer accident? The body lifted the sword above his head and swung it to his side. As the sword stopped, the shockwave blew out the fires around him and cooled the lava back to rock. As the massive shockwave blew apart the remaining stone slabs of the buildings around him, the heavy stone quickly turned to dust in an instant. It destroyed what little was left from the initial explosion, leaving nothing behind but him and a few fires still spotted about the ruins. The shockwave turned all the people beside him that was outside of the initial blast zone into nothing more than red paste thrown across the ground. The ones that were outside of the shockwave were not left unscathed. The clothes were ripped off their bodies, leaving large whelps, if not outright tearing the flesh off them. Their eardrums ruptured from the blast and blood poured from their ears. Their eyes were squished in their sockets, leaving them blinded. For those who survived, they could only scream in panic, sheer pain, and agony. Unable to see, unable to hear, only feel their flesh being ripped from their very bones. Still, the body was bored with nothing to hold his attention. He looked around at the small fire still burning here and there about. He was still trying to figure out what caused that initial explosion. He looked above him at where the light came from, and there, he saw a massive dragon landing in front of him. It was a different looking dragon than the night before, but Astaroth knew that it was the same. She always looked different, but she was always the same one from all his other unsettling nightmares that plagued him. She crushed all the buildings under the weight of her colossal body. The dragon reared back her head. As she lunged her head towards him, a blazing purple inferno erupted from her mouth. The body lifted up his sword once again and made another shockwave, blowing the flames towards his side. He sent the purple flames channeling it down the road, liquefying everything in its wake. The body turned his head towards the destruction. There he saw only molten lava, fires, and melting stones. He turned his head back to the dragon and pushed his chin side to side, popping his neck. The body let out a loud, blood-curdling primeval scream before running towards the dragon. As he leaped up through the air and swung his vile blade, Astaroth woke up and opened his eyes. His eyes were completely white. He looked at his surroundings like he did not know where he was at. He looked at his hands like he was seeing them for the first time. He leaned his head to the side, examining his leg brace, his rifle, and his shotgun as if they were some sort of alien device to him. As he looked at Rook, he saw that Rook was violently growling at him. Rook's fur stood open on its end as he was growling at Astaroth. Astaroth quickly shut and rubbed his eyes. As he opened them back up, they were back to his royal emerald green eyes. Rook, what's wrong? Astaroth asked in confusion. Rook looked at Astaroth in confusion before barking happily at him. Astaroth petted Rook's head, still trying to figure out what just happened. As he looked up to the sky and saw just how late it had gotten, he quickly pulled out his pocket watch and saw the time. Astaroth used both Rook and the tree to push himself up onto his feet. He swiftly grabbed his jacket, throwing it back on. He quickly shouldered his rifle and grabbed his shotgun before quickly heading home. If they did not get home now, they were going to be in big trouble. And after the day they have had, the last thing they wanted was his grandparents asking questions that he could not answer. They quickly headed through the park and quickly headed home for the day. High atop the bell tower, Pan looked through the telescope. She looked over to TK sleeping peacefully in his comfy spot. She turned her attention back to the telescope. Are you the boy who dreams he is an eagle? Or are you an eagle who dreams he is a boy? Pan asked to the open air. Depends entirely on who is sleeping. TK answered. TK, what did you do? She asked, turning towards him. Something naughty. He answered with a Cheshire smile. But why? She asked. Because the hero cannot exist within a vacuum. All he needs is just a little push. He answered. I guess madness and gravity are the same. She stated, looking through the telescope. As Astaroth and Rook got to his grandparents' house, they tried to sneak inside once again. He had slept through dinner time and straight through sundown. If his parents caught him now, he would have hell to pay. He looked into the living room and did not see them. He looked through the living room towards the kitchen and saw the lights were off. He thought that it was clear. All the lights to the house were off. He wondered if his parents were asleep upstairs. He looked at Rook, then waved for him to follow him through the living room. They headed straight into the kitchen. As they stepped into the kitchen, a switching sound snapped through the room, followed by the lights springing to life, filling the room with its soft light. There his mother was standing by the light switch by the entrance. A glass full of red wine and a half-empty bottle sat on the kitchen table. That meant that there were 3 or 4 empty bottles in the recycle bin, more than likely. On the table next to the bottle was an ashtray half full of cigarette butts. She had been waiting all this time for them to come home. Astaroth knew he was in deep trouble now as he stepped away from her, trying to put some distance between them. He looked into her eyes and saw that they were completely glazed over from the alcohol she had consumed. Astaroth and Rook knew they were busted. So, they finished walking into the kitchen and putting some more distance from his mother. Astaroth looked over towards the door to the basement. It was their only hope of escape now. His mother unsteadily staggered towards them. She put her hand on the wall to help hold herself upright as she stepped towards them. She tapped her fingers across the wallpaper as she closed the distance between them. Astaroth froze in place. He could see just how drunk she was. Above all, he knew just how mad she was at them right now. He braced himself for what was about to happen to him. She tried to stand up straight in front of him. She glared down at him for a moment. In a flash, her hand was across Astaroth's face. She had slapped him so hard that it forced him back against the wall behind him. Rook started to growl violently at her. He was not about to stand by and let her do this again. Do you know what time it is, young man? Her voice slurred from the alcohol in her blood. Astaroth pushed himself off the wall, as she looked down at him. 8:48. Astaroth answered as he did. His mother slapped him across his face once again. This time knocking him to the ground and forcing the hat off his head. Astaroth dropped his shotgun onto the floor beside him as he hit the ground. "You shut it?" she stated as Rook started violently barking at her. Astaroth struggled to get up onto his hands. As he did, his mother kicked him in his ribs. "Where did you get those guns?" she demanded to know. As she reached out her hand towards Astaroth, Rook bit down on her wrist and pulled her to the side. He bit her not hard enough to break her skin, but hard enough to show he would stop her. Rook was sickened by her and her blatant disregard for her own child. He has had enough of this deliberate act of child abuse. Rook was inches from snapping Victoria's wrist in his jaws. She screamed in pain, waking the whole house as she tried to force Rook off her, but to no avail. He thrashed his head as he pulled her down onto the floor. His jaws slowly tightened around her wrist, but before he could draw blood, Astaroth quickly raised up his hand in Rook's direction. He pulled himself back before he went through her flesh. As Rook released her wrist, Astaroth grabbed his hat and shotgun. Then, using both Rook and the shotgun's barrel to pull himself up off the floor, he spit a small amount of blood onto the floor and looked over at his mother. Astaroth put his hat on before he put his hand on the wall to steady himself. Rook looked back at Victoria. He loudly and violently growled at her, showing his teeth. Rook was done with her, and he was not about to let her hit his brother again. Astaroth and Rook slowly walked towards the basement door. As his mother saw them trying to leave, she quickly pulled herself off the floor and ran to them. She grabbed Astaroth's right arm, right on the freshly wounded flesh that was being held together by the staples in it. As pain shot through his arm, he quickly pulled his mother off him. As she failed to catch her balance, she landed on the table, knocking it and the chairs behind it over. The glass and bottle of wine shattered against the floor with a loud crash. Victoria tried to get up but was too disoriented from the rush of the fall. In the time before she could recover, Astaroth and Rook made it to the basement. Astaroth quickly locked the door behind them. His mother tried the doorknob, but when it did not open, she started pounding on the door, shouting at them. Astaroth looked at the door for a moment. They had escaped from her, at least for now. "Astaroth, you open this door at once, young man," Victoria shouted loudly as Astaroth and Rook walked down the stairs. Astaroth looked back up at the door and was starting to consider putting a bullet through it. However, he did not feel like wasting the ammo right now. There would be no point in it. It would only be a waste of ammo and a door. He let out a deep breath of relief. At least for now he was away from his mother. "Astaroth, I am your mother, and you will respect me," she demanded as she threw her weight against the door. "Astaroth," she continued, but Astaroth and Rook did not care. They were spent after the day they had and just wanted to sleep. It was much more than the rats and the Hope Grim. It was dealing with Alastair and all the other people today. That left Astaroth feeling completely drained of energy, and his mother was not helping matters. Once Astaroth and Rook got to the base of the stairs, Astaroth put his rifle and shotgun down, then looked up the stairs. He saw the door still shaking as his mother tried to get through the door. Astaroth hung his hat, his jacket, his new harness, and his gun sling up next to the stairs. He looked at the door one last time as it finally stopped. His mother had stopped hitting it, for now. Astaroth carried his rifle, the shotgun, and his hammer to his cot. There he set them in front of his feet. As he sat on the cot, his mother continued pounding on the door again. Astaroth looked down at his weapons before he sat the guns under his cot. He set his hammer next to his nightstand, then looked back towards the door. Rook brought over Astaroth's pajamas for him. Astaroth quickly changed into them. He was ready to get some sleep. Rook stared up the stairs at the door. After a few minutes everything got quiet once more. Astaroth turned on the alarm clock and tried to get some sleep. They slowly started to sleep until the door opened up. They quickly snapped up from the sound of the door opening. Astaroth quickly grabbed his shotgun and pointed at the stairs before the lights turned on. "Down, boys," May said, "Carry. The enemy ain't coming," Jack said, carrying Rook some food and water in his bowls. "If Mom is behind you then the enemy is coming," Astaroth stated, taking his finger off the trigger of his shotgun, then looked to his clock. "Here you go," May said, holding out the tray. Astaroth sat up on his cot and took the tray. Jack sat the bowls in front of Rook. Jack grabbed 2 folding chairs from storage at the back of the basement. He unfolded the chairs for him and May to sit on. As Jack sat down, he looked at Astaroth's rifle and shotgun under his cot. He leant down and picked up the rifle and looked over it. "Nice varmint slayer you got here, boy. Where did you find it?" Jack asked, putting the stock against his shoulder. "Pawn shop," Astaroth answered with his disconnected tone in his voice before he ate. "All right, and the boomstick there?" Jack asked, sliding the shotgun with his foot. "Found it," Astaroth stated as he continued eating. "Okay, where did you get the trench hammer here?" Jack asked as he set the rifle aside to pick up the hammer and looked it over. "Is this enchanted?" Jack added as he saw the rune. "I found it," Astaroth answered. He did not have the energy to deal with any of this right now. He only wanted to get some sleep. However, that was not likely to happen anytime soon for him. As Jack went to touch the hammer to May, she snapped her fingers at him. Jack sat the hammer down and looked at Astaroth, thinking of something to say to him. He was looking for anything to say to him to get Astaroth to talk to him. He turned to May, who shrugged her shoulders at him. Even though they were sitting so close together, Astaroth seemed to be farther than ever and getting farther by the minute. He was never really the talkative type, but this was getting bad. They desperately grabbed at anything just trying to start a conversation with them. However, he was so shut off, so disconnected from everything going on around him. He was more akin to a drone or some sort of a machine than a child. Still, they know what he had been through. They could not really blame him for wanting to keep to himself. Sadly, that was not the way the world worked. He truly had no idea just how close he was to being shipped off down to Arkham Asylum. If that happened to him, his life would officially be ruined beyond repair. He would never be able to get a job. He would never be able to find a relationship. People tend to look down on other people who had to spend time in the Nuthus after all. That was the last thing they wanted for their grandson right now. "How about we go to the range tomorrow and take some pot shots with that varmint rifle and boomstick?" Jack asked, trying to use Astaroth's love of guns to reach out to him. "No thank you," Astaroth answered. Jack turned to May and shrugged his shoulder and shook his head. May nodded her head and took a deep breath. They knew that was going to be a long uphill battle to pull Astaroth out of his shell. Astaroth did not hate his grandparents, he just does not like talking to people. Jack looked over to May. He knew that he himself was not good with these sorts of things. Jack was a soldier after all, he hit first, and he hit hard. May was not much better than Jack was, for the horror she witnessed during the plague outbreak back when she was young. Those nightmares still haunted her deepest of thoughts, time and time again. They both knew that Astaroth and Rook had been through things that no one should have ever gone through. Let alone survived all the inhuman amounts of abuse they had gone through. Both Astaroth's and Rook's bodies had the scars to show the damage they had endured through the years. It would not be long before their bodies matched both Jack's and May's war-damaged bodies. For this was Zion after all, a cruel, savage, and brutal world of vile cruelty. A place where hopes and dreams slowly die after their inevitable conception. No love, nor hope, nor special power will save you from this inevitable cruelty. Zion was a place where it was survival of the cruelest beast, and only the cruelest beast could survive. Jack once told them that Zion, she was the cruelest of mothers, who only favored the merciless, the fearless, the savage, and the strong. Those were the only children she loved. All others would only die shortly after birth. Jack was not wrong in his words of wisdom, of course. For they had seen it firsthand, and they had survived it. Nothing left of them but the nightmares and the scars that littered their bodies. For Astaroth and his brother Rook had learned to be the most savage, to be the most vile, and to be the most cruel. It was the only way they knew how to live. It was this thing called civilization that was the thing they did not know how to live in. For they had dwelt amongst beasts and horrors for too long, and so amongst the beasts and the horrors must they dwell. Say what one will about them, but everything they have been through they survived. They had survived in a place for so long that no human, let alone a child, could possibly endure nor return alive. Yet throughout all their hardships they had to endure, it only made their bonds of brotherhood even stronger. For after all, Astaroth had his brother Rook, and Rook had his brother Astaroth. That was all they needed to survive in this nightmarish world. So, I got an appointment set up for you tomorrow at 3 o'clock, okay? May said. She knew there was nothing that she could say that would reach Astaroth. Jack just nodded his head, knowing that they were past the point of no return with Astaroth. You're on time when you're 10 minutes early, you're late when you're now time, Astaroth said with a mechanical tone in his voice as he handed May back the tray. Okay, get some sleep, May said as she reached for the tray. She noticed something off about Astaroth's right arm. Astaroth, take your shirt off, May said, handing the tray to Jack. Jack looked at her in confusion. May's years of medical training had taught her how to spot an injury. Why? Astaroth asked, looking up at her. Just do it, May ordered. Jack knew what this was, he had lived with her long enough to know what she was doing. I don't feel like it, Astaroth stated. May quickly grabbed the base of Astaroth's shirt and forced it up off him. As she did, his grandparents clearly saw his wounds. Astaroth tried to hide his wounds from them, but he knew it would only be a matter of time until May found out about them. May quickly looked at his wounds, she looked back to Jack. Then she returned her attention to her grandson. Astaroth's wounds just happened today, but they were nearly completely healed. How did you get these wounds? May asked as she looked at him. Astaroth's eyes were not looking at her, they were staring off into the void. May knew that he was not going to tell her. It would not matter how hard she pushed. You're lucky that you have the blessing of the Black Beast thanks to Rook here, May stated as she looked over at Rook. Rook barked happily at her. May was grateful for Rook giving Astaroth this blessing that they shared. They could heal faster than normal people from any kind of injuries, no matter what type, thanks to the blood of the Black Beast pumping through them. They could heal more quickly than any normal person or dog. What should take a few months only took them a few weeks. What would take a few weeks, only took them a few days. This truly was the blessings of the Black Beast, and she was truly grateful that her grandchildren had it. It has saved his life multiple times. So long as they still had blood in their veins, they could still recover, or so the legend goes. However, no one has truly tested that theory to the fullest. Still, it did not make them invincible, nor should they get cocky just because they have it. Well, you did a fine job of patching yourself up, May said as she held her hand over his wounds. May's eyes began to glow a bright blue as light began to glow from her palm. As she placed her hand over his wound, his skin started to burn, and steam rolled over May's hand. Still, Astaroth didn't move as his flesh was burning. As his flesh burned, his wounds began to heal almost immediately. After a few seconds, his wounds was completely closed until it was fully sealed. Only scars and the staples on his flesh remained. Jack tapped on May's shoulder with a pair of needle-nose pliers. May nodded her head as she took the pliers and carefully started removing the staples. She set them aside as she removed them one at a time from his flesh. Astaroth stared off into the void, barely able to feel the sting as the staples were removed from his body. In truth, he was truly unfazed by this. He simply just wanted to go back to sleep. He had grown numb to the sensation of pain. He was truly empty and hollow. Through the years of abuse that he had suffered, he had grown numb to pain. He was unable to feel almost anything that was done to him anymore. Some days he truly wondered if he was even still alive. For only the living could feel pain. That was the only way they truly had to know they were still alive. The dead could feel nothing. Only an empty hollow shell, unable to feel, unable to care, almost mechanical in nature. He surely could not tell anymore, nor could he bring himself to care about it. He had long since accepted the fact that he was a dead thing, and the dead have no right amongst the living. The only thing that truly reminded him that he was still alive was those brief moments in which he could feel pain once more. Earlier today, when he was shot in the arm, he did not even register it. Even when he was stabbed in the chest, he could not truly feel it. It was the shock more than anything that caught him off guard. Yet he could still feel something, he just was not sure what it was anymore. Astaroth, look, you know you could go very far and do a lot of good if you join the Black Priesthood like May here, Jack stated. May quickly turned her head and glared at him as Astaroth just nodded his head. May would never let her grandson join the Black Priesthood like herself, but if this would help pull Astaroth back, then she would. I could help you get into the schools if you'd like, Astaroth, May said as she removed the last staple from his chest. I'll think about it. He just wanted them to leave him alone. Okay, Astaroth, just remember your appointment tomorrow, May said as she took the tray and headed towards the stairs with Jack right behind her. Thank you to all who listened until the very end. We hope you remember to leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, as it does help the channel grow and it will encourage us to release further episodes in the future. Until next time, part 13 will be coming soon. Thank you and have a beautiful day.